My name is Mike Crable. Today we're going to be talking about Article 1, the legislative branch. Now bear in mind that the context of these discussions is at the time the Constitution was written, right? It's been changed a lot. I think in separation of powers we mentioned about how things have kind of gotten messed around. There have been a blurring of distinction between the various branches of government. It's going to be just a brief overview because I understand I'm going fast to try to get a lot of information into a short period of time. Some people have complained about that, so I'm going to try to slow down and we'll cover less information but perhaps have more episodes of the lesson. Article 1, of course, is the first article. As such, it was perceived by the Founding Fathers to be the most important. And what it did was it created a bicameral legislature. Bicameral doesn't mean two camels, right? It means cameral. Cameral is a word that means house. Bi means two. So the House of Representatives and the Senate, bicameral, two houses. And essentially, the concept of the legislative branch, as it was originally envisioned, was that certain things would originate, primarily tax bills that would raise revenue, within the House of Representatives only. Remember, at the time of the Constitution, there were four bodies created: the House of Representatives, the Senate, the office of the President, and the Supreme Court. Of these four bodies, only the House of Representatives was elected. Only the House of Representatives was elected by the people. The Senate, until the passage of the 17th Amendment, which was a colossal mistake, the Senate was appointed by the state. So each state had the right, its legislature would appoint two senators. The concept being that we were the United States, and the representatives would represent the people of the individual states, which is why their proportion is based on the enumeration or the census, and then apportioned. That is, we've got 435 members of the House of Representatives. We apportion to each state based on the population of the state. So for instance, California, I believe, has 53. Texas has 32 members in our congressional delegation. So it's apportioned based on the number of people determined by the census, which is taken every 10 years. On the other hand, the Senate, which is essentially now become just a super House of Representatives because they're selected in the exact same way. They have to go out and campaign. They shake hands, kiss babies, hopefully not the other way around. That is, shake babies and kiss hands. What now has happened is the senators are directly beholden to the people, which many people say is good. But if you think of what a republic is and the concept of federalism, which we've gotten so far away from, the states were supposed to have input into that. And the state legislature would appoint, as a senator, someone who they felt had the state's best interest at heart. So when we're thinking about things in the grand terms like the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which took place in 1856, yes, these were great debates, but they were being taken in congressional districts. And the argument was for and against the representative who would support the appointment of either Lincoln or Douglas as a senator. People get this confused a lot of times and think, oh, well, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, people have been electing senators for centuries, decades. Not true. Not true at all. While they were preaching to the populace, they were preaching to the populace in an indirect way, hoping to get the appointment of the state of Illinois to the Senate. We now know what they should have been doing is talking on the phone to the governor, making some sort of deal, offering him money. I'm just kidding, of course, but the Blagojevich matter, which has come out over the last few months, leads me to believe that there can sometimes be problems. That's not to say that the system is bad. And in fact, one of the main reasons that we even got to an elected senator system was based on some conflicts after the Civil War. Congress kept trying to put more and more regulations on what the states could do and who they could choose and how they could choose them. And those regulations ultimately culminated in the passage of the 17th Amendment, which decimated a large portion of federalism and ruined the process of the senators being anything more, and I mean this with all due respect to senators, because there are only 100 of them, and it's, obviously it's a prestigious job, but it's not, I don't believe it is as important a job as it used to be in terms of protecting your state. Now it's more like you're a super member of the House of Representatives, as opposed to being someone who is there to fight on behalf of, for instance, Texas, if you were a member of the Texas delegation. Moving on, the first article of the Constitution clearly enumerates the powers of the federal government, that is, of this bicameral body that's established. It sets forth certain things that the body can do. What is a particular problem is the necessary and proper clause, and that's what's been bent and distorted and has led us into an era where the federal government has virtually unlimited powers. As we discussed in federalism, it's a problem, but that's where we are, because the power to carry out the enumerated powers of Congress culminates with, and such other powers as are reasonable and necessary in order for them to carry out those that are enumerated. That creates what we call the implied powers. So your two houses of Congress have express powers and implied powers. And implied powers are those that the courts have looked at and said, well, if they're given the power, for instance, to regulate bankruptcy, they must have the power to create bankruptcy courts, which are Article I courts, which are not governed by the same rules as Article III courts, which we'll discuss under the judiciary. So you have implied powers, which are found nowhere in the Constitution, are simply made up, but in theory should be a reasonable extension of those express powers. You also have certain powers which are prohibited to Congress. Ironically, this is where you find ex post facto, that is, bills that make something a criminal violation after the person has done it. Well, I know that Bill Smith has a red barn. Let's pass a federal law that says you can't have red barns. That is actually something that's found in Article I as a prohibition against what Congress may not do. So there are limitations, clearly spelled out limitations, although, as I said, they have been somewhat tread upon on the legislative power. In a nutshell, though, the legislative power is to write laws. One of the strange things that I've noted in other lectures is that the veto power is located in Article I, because it talks about, and we've discussed how a bill becomes a law. The House has to pass it, the Senate has to pass it, they have to be identical. Period, semicolon, exclamation point, all of it has to be identical. Then it goes to the President. Article I says he can either sign it, in which case it becomes a law, he can do nothing, in which case it depends on whether or not Congress is in session. If they are not in session and days pass, then it's called a pocket veto if he doesn't sign it, or he can veto it, in which case he clearly says, no, I don't like this legislation. Ordinarily it's accompanied by a statement as to why he doesn't like it. It gets sent back to the legislature, and if the House and the Senate both vote by a 2/3 vote, they can override the veto. The legislative branch is also important for its powers of impeachment, but it looks like we're running short on time, so we're going to address that in another episode. That is a quick overview of the powers of our legislative branch. Thank you and have a great day.